I still remember how the chandelier light reflected in the crystal glasses that evening. My mother had spent hours polishing them. Grandma's heirloom set that only came out for special occasions. Tonight qualified, apparently. My sister Elaine was back in town after 3 years in Chicago, and my parents had insisted we all gather for what my father called a proper family reunion. "Just be civil," my mother had whispered to me on the phone that morning. "For one night, Rebecca, is that too much to ask?" The resignation in her voice made me feel like I was 15 again, being scolded for not including Elaine in my weekend plans. Always the difficult one, always the one who needed to try harder, to be more accommodating, more forgiving. Never mind that Elaine was the reason we hadn't spoken in 3 years. "I'll be there at 7, I'd replied, not making any promises about civility. Some wounds were too deep for politeness to cover. I spent the afternoon in my apartment, trying on and discarding outfits. Nothing seemed right. Too casual would look like I didn't care. Too formal would suggest I was trying to compete with Elaine, who always dressed impeccably. I finally settled on a simple navy blue dress, professional but not showy. The kind of outfit that wouldn't draw attention, which was exactly what I wanted tonight. To observe, not to be observed. Before leaving, I opened my bedside drawer and took out the cream-colored envelope I'd received a week ago. I'd read its contents so many times I practically had them memorized, but I checked once more to make sure all the papers were there. The letter from Mr. Harrington, Grandma's lawyer, the forensic document examiner's report, the notice from the county prosecutor's office. Each page was a piece of armor I was gathering for tonight's battle. A battle Elaine didn't even know was coming. I slipped the envelope into my purse, took a deep breath, and headed out. The 15-minute drive to my parents' house in the suburbs was all too familiar. Past the library where I worked, through downtown with its quaint shops and cafes, into the neighborhood where I'd grown up. Oak trees lined the streets, their leaves just beginning to turn golden in the early October air. I arrived 15 minutes early, parking my modest sedan behind my father's Volvo in the driveway. My hands were shaking slightly as I rang the doorbell, clutching a bottle of Cabernet I'd splurged on for the occasion. "Rebecca." My mother's smile was too wide, too bright as she opened the door. Her eyes darted immediately to the wine bottle, then back to my face. "You look lovely. Come in, come in. Your father's just finishing up in the kitchen." The house smelled the same as it always had, a mix of my mother's lavender potpourri and whatever my father was cooking. Today it was his famous pot roast, the meal he always prepared for celebrations. The familiar scent made my chest ache with a complicated nostalgia. "Is she here yet?" I asked, knowing the answer before my mother shook her head. Elaine texted, "She's running a bit late. Traffic from the airport." Mom touched my arm gently, her fingers cool against my skin. "Please, Becca. Tonight is important to your father. You know how he's been since Grandma passed." I did know. Dad had been quieter, more withdrawn since the funeral 6 months ago. Grandma had been his mother after all, and they'd been close. What he didn't know, what none of them knew except Elaine and me, was what had happened after the will was read. "I'll be on my best behavior," I promised, though I crossed my fingers behind my back like a child. Some promises were meant to be broken. I placed the envelope on the side table by the stairs, tucked halfway under a stack of mail, hidden in plain sight. Then I followed my mother into the kitchen, where the warm, savory aroma of pot roast grew stronger. Dad looked up from the stove and smiled, the corners of his eyes crinkling in the way I'd always loved. At 65, his hair had gone completely silver, but he still stood tall and straight, his blue eyes, the same shade as mine, clear and bright behind his glasses. "There's my girl." He wiped his hands on his apron and embraced me. He smelled of spices and the same aftershave he'd worn my entire life. "Thanks for coming." "Wouldn't miss it," I replied, and part of me meant it. Despite everything, I had missed them. I'd missed this. The three of us in the kitchen, the easy rhythm we fell into as we prepared dinner together. For a little while, I could almost pretend everything was normal. "Can I help with anything?" I asked, setting my purse down on the counter. "You could finish the salad," Mom suggested, gesturing toward the half-prepared bowl of greens. I was just about to dress it. I nodded and washed my hands at the sink, then began slicing cucumbers on the cutting board. The familiar motions were soothing. The soft thud of the knife against the board, the crisp scent of fresh vegetables. This had always been my job at family dinners, preparing the salad while Mom handled the sides, and Dad took care of the main course. "How's the library?" Dad asked as he checked the roast in the oven. "Good," I said, focusing on making each cucumber slice perfectly even. "Busy. We just got approval for that digitization grant I told you about." "That's wonderful, honey," Mom said, though I could tell she was only half listening, her attention divided between me and the sound of cars passing by outside, waiting for Elaine. "It's a big deal," Dad said, giving Mom a pointed look. "Rebecca's going to preserve all those historical documents for future generations. Our own daughter, making history accessible to everyone." I felt a warmth spread through me at his words. Dad had always understood why my work mattered to me, even if it didn't come with the prestige or salary of Elaine's law career. "Thanks, Dad," I said softly. "It means a lot to me." "We're proud of you," he replied. "Both of you girls, in different ways." Before I could respond, the doorbell rang. The knife paused in my hand, hovering over a half-sliced cucumber. "I'll get it," Mom said quickly, smoothing her dress and hurrying to the door. Dad and I exchanged a glance. His held a silent plea. "Please try." I nodded slightly. I would try. For him. Elaine's laugh floated in from the entryway, that musical sound that had always made people turn their heads. She'd been the golden child, the one with the perfect grades and the perfect smile, the one everyone adored. I could hear her voice now, bright and confident, asking Mom about her garden club, about the neighbors, about anything and everything except what really mattered. I set down the knife and wiped my hands on a dish towel, taking a moment to compose myself before facing my sister. The sound of high heels on hardwood approached the kitchen. Rebecca. She stood in the kitchen doorway, elegant in a navy blue dress that looked far more expensive than mine, though we'd apparently had the same idea about color. Her hair was shorter now, cut into a sleek bob that framed her face perfectly. She looked successful, polished, exactly like someone who had gotten everything she wanted. "Elaine," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. "Welcome home." My sister's smile didn't reach her eyes. "It's good to be back, although I'd forgotten how quiet it is here compared to Chicago. Not all of us need constant noise and distraction," I said, then immediately regretted it when I saw Dad's shoulders tense. Elaine's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "I suppose not. Some people prefer stability." She glanced around the kitchen, her gaze lingering on my simple dress, my unmanicured hands, my sensible shoes. Her eyes said what her lips didn't. Some people never change. Some people never grow. Dad cleared his throat. "Well, dinner's almost ready. Why don't we move to the dining room? Rebecca, could you help me bring out the food?" I was grateful for the distraction, for the simple tasks that gave my hands something to do other than clench into fists. I carried the salad bowl and a basket of rolls while Dad followed with the pot roast. Mom and Elaine trailed behind with the sides and the wine I'd brought. The dining room table was set with Grandma's fine china, another special occasion touch that made my stomach twist. The last time we'd used these plates had been at Grandma's house, the Christmas before she got sick. She'd presided over the table from her usual place at the head, her arthritic hands still managing to serve everyone with grace. I remembered how she'd squeezed my hand when I helped her clear the dishes. How she'd whispered, "You're the one who remembers, Rebecca. You're the keeper of our history." I hadn't understood what she meant then. I did now. I carefully placed the food down and took my seat across from Elaine. Mom sat at one end of the table, Dad at the other. The seating arrangement was strategic, I knew, separating Elaine and me, placing our parents between us as buffers. "This looks wonderful," Elaine said, spreading her napkin across her lap. "I've missed your cooking, Dad. You can't get a pot roast like this in Chicago." Dad beamed at the compliment. "It's your grandmother's recipe. She always said the secret was in how long you let the meat rest." A shadow crossed Elaine's face at the mention of Grandma, but it disappeared so quickly I might have imagined it. Well, she was right, as always. "So," Mom said brightly as she began passing dishes around, "Elaine was just telling me about her promotion. Junior partner at only 32. Isn't that wonderful?" "Congratulations," I said, serving myself some salad to avoid meeting her gaze. I speared a cucumber slice with more force than necessary. "Thank you," Elaine replied. "It's been a lot of work, but worth it. The firm is really supportive." She paused, then added, "What about you, Rebecca? Still at the library?" The way she said library made it sound like I spent my days cleaning toilets rather than preserving historical documents and managing research projects. I took a slow sip of water. "Yes," I said simply, "still at the library." I didn't mention my recent promotion to head of archival research, or the grant I'd secured for our local history digitization project. It wouldn't matter to her. "Rebecca's doing wonderfully there," Dad interjected. "They value her tremendously." I shot him a grateful look. "I'm sure they do," Elaine said, in a tone that suggested the opposite. She turned to Mom. "Did I tell you about the Marshall case? It made the Chicago Tribune." And just like that, the conversation shifted to Elaine's career achievements, her important clients, her busy social life in Chicago. Mom and Dad listened with rapt attention, asking questions that gave her more opportunities to elaborate on her success. I focused on my food, on the weight of the knowledge in my purse, on the confrontation that was coming. "How long are you in town for, Elaine?" Mom asked as she refilled our wine glasses. "Just until Monday. I have a big case starting Tuesday." She smiled. "But I'm looking at properties while I'm here." I nearly choked on my water. "Properties? Here?" Elaine nodded, clearly pleased by my reaction. "The firm is opening a branch office in Hartford. I've been asked to head it up." "You're moving back?" I couldn't keep the disbelief from my voice. Hartford was less than 30 minutes from our hometown. After 3 years of barely any contact, she was planning to move practically next door. "That's wonderful news," Mom exclaimed, her eyes lighting up. "Isn't it, Rebecca?" Before I could respond with something non-committal, Dad raised his glass. "A toast," he said, "to family reunions and new beginnings." We all raised our glasses, a perfect tableau of family harmony. If you didn't look too closely at my white knuckles or the tight line of Elaine's smile. "Speaking of properties," Elaine said after we'd all taken a sip, "I actually looked at a place on Maple Street yesterday. It needs some work, but the bones are good." Maple Street, where Grandma's house had been. The house that should have been split between us according to her will. The house that had mysteriously been sold just weeks after the funeral, before I even had a chance to go through Grandma's things properly. "Maple Street is lovely," Mom said, "close to everything. And the money from Grandma's house will certainly help with the down payment," Elaine added casually, as if she were commenting on the weather. It was so generous of her to leave it to me. The silence that followed was deafening. Mom looked uncomfortable, Dad confused. They didn't know. Of course they didn't. "What do you mean?" Dad asked slowly. "Mother's will divided everything equally between you girls." Elaine's eyes widened slightly, the only indication that she realized her mistake. But she recovered quickly. "Oh, Rebecca and I came to an arrangement about the house," she said smoothly. "She preferred a cash settlement. Isn't that right, Rebecca?" All eyes turned to me. My heart hammered against my ribs as I thought of the envelope on the side table. I had planned to wait until after dinner, to do this privately, but Elaine had forced my hand. "No," I said quietly. "That's not right at all." The silence that followed felt like glass about to shatter. I could see the confusion on my father's face, the dawning alarm on my mother's. Elaine's expression remained carefully composed, but I noticed how she gripped her wine glass, knuckles white, just like mine. "Rebecca," she said, her voice taking on that familiar condescending tone she'd perfected since childhood. The one she used when explaining to our parents why it wasn't her fault I'd come home crying, why she couldn't possibly have been the one to break Grandma's vase, why the teacher was mistaken about who had started the argument. "We discussed this. After the funeral, remember? In Grandma's study." Her eyes locked with mine, silently warning me to back down. I took a slow, deliberate breath. The moment I'd rehearsed for months had arrived, though not exactly as I'd planned. Part of me wished I'd confronted her privately, spared our parents this ugly truth. But another part, the part that had lain awake night after night, seething with the injustice of it all, was glad they would finally see who their perfect daughter really was. "No, Elaine. We didn't discuss anything." My voice was quiet but steady. "You told me Grandma had changed her will before she died. You showed me papers I now know were forged." Dad put his fork down with a small clatter that seemed to echo in the tense silence. "What's going on here?" Elaine laughed, but it sounded hollow. "Dad, Rebecca's just upset. She's always been emotional about these things. You know how she gets when she feels overlooked." She shot me a look that was half pity, half warning. "Emotional," I repeated. "Is that what you call it when someone discovers their sister has stolen their inheritance?" "Rebecca!" My mother's voice was sharp with warning. "This is hardly the time or place." "When is the time, Mom? When is the place? It's been 6 months." I could feel tears threatening, but I blinked them back. I wouldn't cry. Not now. 6 months of wondering how my own sister could do this to me. 6 months of trying to understand why Grandma would change her will at the last minute, leaving everything to Elaine when she always said she wanted us to share equally. She changed her mind, Elaine insisted. She told me she wanted me to have the house because I was the one who visited her every weekend at the nursing home. I was the one who made sure she was comfortable, who brought her favorite foods, who sat with her for hours. There was a kernel of truth in that. Elaine had visited Grandma faithfully during those final months. But so had I, on different days, working around my schedule at the library. We had developed an unspoken system, each of us giving Grandma the attention she needed without having to interact with each other more than necessary. That may be true, I acknowledged, but it doesn't explain why she would change her will without telling me. Without telling Dad, her own son. It doesn't explain why you waited until after the funeral to show me these supposed changes. Why you rushed to sell her house, liquidate her accounts, clear out her belongings before anyone could ask questions. "I didn't rush anything," Elaine protested, but her voice had lost some of its conviction. "You sold her house 3 weeks after the funeral," I said. 3 weeks, Elaine. I hadn't even finished going through her library. All those books, her first editions, her collection of local histories, all gone. I saw Dad flinch at that. He knew how much Grandma's library had meant to me, how those quiet afternoons reading together had shaped my life, my career choices. The house was just sitting there, costing money in taxes and utilities, Elaine argued. It made sense to sell quickly. And what about her jewelry, her china? I gestured at the plates beneath our barely touched food. Mom had to practically beg you for these, and they were promised to her years ago. No one said anything about wanting those things. Elaine's composure was slipping. I can't read minds, Rebecca. If you wanted something specific, you should have said so. I did say so. I asked for time to go through her things properly, to document everything as she would have wanted. You said you'd wait. And then I got a text, Elaine, saying the house had been emptied and was on the market. Mom looked stricken. I thought you girls were handling everything together. That's what your father and I understood. I shook my head. That's what Elaine wanted you to believe. This is ridiculous, Elaine said, pushing her plate away. I don't have to sit here and be accused of… What, exactly? Following Grandma's wishes, managing her estate efficiently, being the responsible one as usual? Forgery, I said. Fraud. Theft. I pushed my chair back and stood. I'm going to get something. Then we can all hear the truth. I walked to the entryway, my legs unsteady beneath me. The envelope was exactly where I'd left it, partially hidden under the stack of mail. I clutched it for a moment, knowing that once I opened it, there would be no going back. No pretending we were the perfect family my parents so desperately wanted us to be. When I returned to the dining room, Elaine was speaking rapidly to my parents, her hands moving in animated gestures. Always been jealous of my relationship with Grandma. She's making this into something it's not. If she's upset about particular items, we can discuss that. But to accuse me of something illegal is… She fell silent when she saw what I was holding. What is that? She asked, her voice suddenly thin. A letter from Mr. Harrington, I replied, resuming my seat. Grandma's lawyer. I received it last week after I finally decided to look into what really happened with her estate. My father frowned. Rebecca, what are you talking about? The will was clear. Everything was to be divided equally. Yes, I agreed. That's what the will said. The real will. The one Grandma signed 2 years ago when she was still living independently. The one lodged with Mr. Harrington's firm. I removed the top sheet from the envelope and slid it across the table to my father. This is a copy of that will. You'll see on page 3, paragraph 2, where it specifically states that her estate, including the house, her investments, and all personal property, was to be divided equally between her granddaughters. Dad put on his reading glasses and studied the document. Mom leaned over to read as well, her lips pressed into a tight line. But Elaine showed me a different will, I continued. One dated just 3 weeks before Grandma died, when she was already in hospice care, one that left everything to her. Elaine's face had gone pale. She reached for her wine glass and took a long drink. She changed her mind, she repeated, but her voice lacked conviction. She asked me to help her update her will. She wasn't thinking clearly about what a burden the house would be to maintain, how it made more sense for one person to inherit it outright. Did you take her to Mr. Harrington to make these changes? I asked. Elaine hesitated. No. She didn't want to bother with all that. She asked me to help her write something simpler. A handwritten will? Dad looked up, frowning. That doesn't sound like Mother. She was always meticulous about legal matters. She was tired, Elaine insisted. She wanted things settled quickly without fuss. The timing is concerning, Mom said carefully. If she made these changes when she was already in hospice. She knew what she was doing, Elaine said sharply. Are you suggesting I took advantage of her? The question hung in the air, unanswered. I removed another document from the envelope. This is what Elaine showed me after the funeral. A handwritten will, supposedly signed by Grandma 3 weeks before she died. I passed it to my father. And this, I continued, pulling out a third sheet. is the report from the forensic document examiner Mr. Harrington hired. You went behind my back. Elaine's voice rose. You had someone analyze Grandma's signature? I had doubts, I said simply. The signature didn't look right to me, and the timing seemed suspicious. So yes, I asked questions. Dad was reading the examiner's report, his expression growing graver with each line. Mom had her hand over her mouth, as if physically holding back words she didn't want to say. The examiner concluded that the signature was forged, I said. Not just different because Grandma was weak or medicated, but deliberately forged, by someone attempting to imitate her handwriting. This is a mistake, Elaine said, but her voice was hollow. That examiner is wrong. I watched her sign it. Did you? I asked. Because according to her medical records, Grandma was heavily sedated that day. The hospice staff noted that she was unresponsive for most of the afternoon. Elaine's composure cracked. You don't understand, she said, her voice suddenly desperate. I did what she wanted. We talked about it before she got so sick. She meant to change her will. She just ran out of time. So you helped her? Dad asked, his voice barely above a whisper. By forging her signature? By creating a false will? I carried out her wishes. Elaine's voice rose. She told me she wanted me to have the house. She knew Rebecca wouldn't appreciate it the way I would. She knew I was the one who needed the financial support, who had student loans to pay off, who had sacrificed to build my career. But that's not what her legal will said, I pointed out. And even if she had expressed those wishes verbally, which I doubt, that doesn't give you the right to forge documents and circumvent her actual legal will. I was doing what she would have wanted, Elaine insisted, but her argument was weakening, and she knew it. By selling her house immediately? By clearing out her belongings without consulting anyone? By keeping this all secret from Dad, her own son? I shook my head. No, Elaine, you were doing what you wanted. She always loved Rebecca more. The words burst from her like they'd been held back for years. All those afternoons in her library, all those special projects they did together, all those stories about our family history that only Rebecca seemed to care about. I was the practical one, the one who helped with everyday things. I was the one who visited her every weekend in the nursing home. I was the one who brought her meals and sat with her when she couldn't remember anyone's name. I earned that money. The raw pain in her voice made me flinch, but I didn't back down. That doesn't give you the right to steal from me, or to lie to all of us. You have everything else, Elaine cried. Mom and Dad's approval, your perfect little life in this perfect little town. You stayed close to home, the good daughter who never left. I went out into the world, built a career from nothing, and all I ever hear is how wonderful it is that Rebecca is preserving dusty old books at the library. I needed that money to establish myself, to show everyone I could be successful too. Mom was crying silently, tears streaming down her face. Dad looked older suddenly, the lines around his eyes deeper than I'd ever seen them. Elaine, he said, this isn't about who deserves what. This isn't about who Grandma loved more or who visits more often, or who has the more impressive career. This is about honesty, about family. Your grandmother wanted to provide for both her granddaughters. What you did wasn't just illegal. It was a betrayal of her trust. And mine, I added quietly. And yours. Elaine's shoulders slumped. For a moment, she looked like the little girl I'd grown up with, the one who used to climb into my bed during thunderstorms because she was afraid of the lightning, the one who had once followed me everywhere, wanting to do everything her big sister did. I hadn't thought about that Elaine in years. What happens now? Mom asked, her voice unsteady. I took a deep breath. That depends on Elaine. Mr. Harrington has drawn up papers to correct the situation. I withdrew the final document from the envelope. If she signs them, acknowledging the original will as valid and agreeing to return my half of the inheritance, I won't press charges. You're blackmailing me, Elaine said, but her voice had lost its edge. No, I'm giving you a chance to make this right. I met her gaze steadily. More than you gave me. The silence that followed was heavy with years of unspoken hurts and resentments. Finally, Elaine reached for her purse and pulled out a checkbook. Fine, she said, her voice flat. How much? It's not just about the money, I replied. It's about acknowledging what you did. To me. To Grandma's memory. What do you want me to say? That I'm sorry? That I made a mistake? Her voice cracked slightly. Would that even matter to any of you? It would matter to me, Dad said quietly. Elaine looked at him, then at our mother, who was still silently crying. Something shifted in her expression, a softening, a crack in the armor of resentment and defensiveness she'd built around herself. I thought, she began, then stopped. She took a deep breath and tried again. I always thought you both valued Rebecca more, her choices, her life. I was never enough. Mom reached across the table and took Elaine's hand. That's not true. It was never true. We've always been proud of both our daughters. Then why did it always feel like I had to work twice as hard for half the recognition? Elaine asked, her composure crumbling. Why did it always seem like Rebecca was the special one? The one who understood Grandma, who connected with her in a way I never could? The one who stayed close to home? Who followed the path you approved of? I felt a sudden rush of sadness for my sister, for the insecurity she'd carried all these years, for the lengths she'd gone to prove her worth. I never knew you felt that way, I said softly. I always thought you were the golden child, the perfect one, the one who got straight A's without trying, who was popular in school, who went on to a prestigious career. I thought Grandma's library was the one place where I mattered more. Elaine gave a bitter laugh. Perfect? I've been living in a studio apartment, working 80-hour weeks trying to make partner. There is no branch office in Hartford. I made that up because I couldn't bear to admit that I'm drowning in student loans and credit card debt, that even with Grandma's money, I'm barely staying afloat. The admission hung in the air between us, raw and painful and honest in a way we hadn't been with each other in years, maybe ever. Why didn't you say something? Mom asked. We would have helped you. Because I wanted to succeed on my own, Elaine replied. I wanted to prove I could make it without help, without falling back on the family safety net. And then, when Grandma got sick, and I saw how much her house was worth, how much she had in investments, it seemed like the solution to everything. A way to pay off my debt, to start fresh, to finally have the security I've been chasing for years. But at my expense, I said. Elaine looked at me, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time that evening. Yes, she acknowledged. At your expense. And I'm sorry for that, Rebecca. I truly am. I convinced myself that you didn't need the money as much as I did, that your life was already settled, while mine was still precarious. You could have talked to me, I said. We could have figured something out together. Would you have given up your half of the inheritance? She asked. I hesitated. No, I admitted. But I might have helped you in other ways. We're sisters, Elaine. That's supposed to mean something. Dad cleared his throat. I think, he said slowly, we all have a lot to talk about. Things that should have been said a long time ago. He was right. The perfect family dinner was ruined, but maybe something more important was happening. Something real. Before we do that, I said, I need to know. Will you sign the papers, Elaine? Will you make this right? My sister looked at me for a long moment, then nodded. Yes, she said quietly. I will. I felt a tension I'd been carrying for months, years maybe, begin to ease. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. "Then let's talk," I said. "Really talk. About Grandma, about us, about everything." Mom wiped her tears and stood. "I'll make some coffee." As she walked to the kitchen, Dad gathered the papers and set them aside. Then he raised his glass once more. "To honesty," he said, "and to healing." Elaine and I looked at each other across the table. Slowly, cautiously, we raised our glasses too. The crystal clinked together, the sound clear and bright in the quiet room. It wasn't the perfect family reunion my parents had hoped for, but it was something perhaps more valuable, the beginning of a true one. That night, as we sat around the table talking until the early hours of the morning, we began the difficult work of rebuilding trust, of seeing each other not as the perfect or imperfect daughters we'd tried to be, but as the flawed, complex women we actually were. And somehow, in that painful honesty, I felt closer to my sister than I had in years. Not because she was perfect, but because, finally, she was real. The morning after our confrontation, I woke up in my old bedroom at my parents' house. Mom had insisted I stay over rather than drive home late, and surprisingly, Elaine had accepted the invitation to stay as well. It felt strange to be back in my childhood bed, surrounded by remnants of my younger self. Faded posters on the walls, dusty trophies from high school debate tournaments, bookshelves filled with worn paperbacks. I lay there for a while, listening to the familiar sounds of the house waking up. Dad's footsteps on the stairs, the coffee maker gurgling in the kitchen, birds chirping outside my window. The events of the previous night felt almost dreamlike in the soft morning light, but the weight of the signed papers in my purse confirmed that it had all really happened. When I finally made my way downstairs, I found Dad alone in the kitchen, reading the newspaper at the table with a mug of coffee. He looked up when I entered and smiled, though the strain around his eyes was still evident. "Morning, sweetheart. Coffee?" I nodded and poured myself a cup from the pot, then joined him at the table. "Where's Mom?" "And Elaine?" "Your mother's in the garden. Said she needed some fresh air." "Elaine's still asleep, I think." He folded the newspaper and set it aside. "How are you holding up?" It was a loaded question. How was I holding up after discovering my sister's betrayal? After confronting her in front of our parents? After watching years of family dynamics unravel over dinner? "I'm processing," I said finally. "It was a lot." Dad nodded. "For all of us." He stared into his coffee for a moment before looking up at me again. "Rebecca, I want you to know something. Your mother and I, we never meant to make either of you feel less valued. We love you both so much, in different ways perhaps, but equally. I know that, Dad. Do you? Because last night made it clear that neither of you has felt that way. And that's on us. Your mother and me. We should have seen it, should have addressed it years ago." I thought about Elaine's words from the night before, her conviction that I was the favorite, that I had everything. How different that was from my own perception that she had always been the golden child, the successful one, the one who made our parents proud. "Maybe we all got caught in our own narratives," I suggested. Elaine and I both created stories about our place in the family that weren't entirely accurate. Dad reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "When did you get so wise?" I smiled wryly. "Somewhere between finding out my sister forged Grandma's will and deciding not to press charges, I guess." He winced. "About that. I'm still struggling to understand how Elaine could have done something like this. It's so unlike her." "Is it?" I asked gently. Elaine has always been driven to succeed, to prove herself, and she's always been good at justifying her actions when they serve her goals. Dad sighed. "I suppose you're right. I just never thought she'd go this far." He paused. "What happens now? With Grandma's estate, I mean." According to the agreement Elaine signed last night, she'll transfer my half of the proceeds from the house sale within 30 days, along with half of what's left from Grandma's investments and bank accounts. I sipped my coffee, which had cooled to the perfect temperature. Mr. Harrington will oversee the process to make sure everything's handled properly this time. And what about the personal items? Grandma's things? I felt a pang at the thought of all those irreplaceable possessions, the books, the photographs, the small treasures that had made up Grandma's life. Most of them are gone, sold or given away when Elaine cleared out the house. But she promised to give me a detailed list of what happened to everything, and to return anything she still has that I want. Like what? I thought for a moment. Grandma's fountain pen collection, her first editions of Austen and Bronte, the family photo albums. I swallowed against a sudden tightness in my throat. Her journals. Dad nodded. Mother would have wanted you to have those things. She knew how much you valued family history, how much you loved literature. She understood me, I said softly. In a way no one else ever has. That's why it hurt so much to think she'd cut me out at the end. She wouldn't have, Dad said with certainty. Not the mother I knew. I know that now. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug. But for months, I believed she had. That maybe I hadn't mattered to her as much as I thought. It was devastating. I'm sorry you went through that alone. I didn't want to burden you and Mom. You were both already grieving, and without proof, it would have just sounded like I was jealous of Elaine. Before Dad could respond, we heard footsteps on the stairs. A moment later, Elaine appeared in the doorway, looking uncharacteristically disheveled in borrowed pajamas, her perfectly styled bob mussed from sleep. She hesitated when she saw us sitting together, as if unsure of her welcome. "Good morning," Dad said, his voice carefully neutral. "There's coffee." Elaine nodded and moved to the counter to pour herself a cup. Her movements were stiff, uncertain. I realized I'd rarely seen my sister without her armor of perfect clothes, perfect hair, perfect confidence. This vulnerable version of her was almost unrecognizable. She joined us at the table, sitting across from me just as she had at dinner the night before. But the dynamic was different now. The tension replaced with an awkward, fragile truce. "Did you sleep okay?" I asked, breaking the silence. "Not really," she admitted. "Too much on my mind." "Same." Dad glanced between us, then stood. "I think I'll go check on your mother. You two should talk." He squeezed Elaine's shoulder as he passed, a small gesture of reassurance that brought tears to her eyes. After he left, we sat in silence for a long moment. I waited, giving Elaine space to speak first if she wanted to. Finally, she did. "I've been thinking about what happens next," she said, her voice hoarse. "After I transfer your half of the inheritance." "What do you mean?" She traced the rim of her coffee mug with one finger. "My life in Chicago. My job. All of it was built on this image I created, the successful attorney, the woman who had it all together. But it's a house of cards, Rebecca. I'm drowning in debt. I'm one bad review away from losing my position at the firm. I've been running so hard for so long. And for what? To prove something to people who never actually doubted me in the first place?" The raw honesty in her voice struck me. This was a side of Elaine I hadn't seen since we were children, before competition and comparison had driven a wedge between us. "What do you want to do?" I asked. She laughed humorlessly. "That's just it. I don't know. For the first time in my life, I don't have a 5-year plan, a 10-year strategy. I just know I can't keep living the way I have been." "Maybe that's not a bad thing," I suggested. "A fresh start, a chance to figure out what actually makes you happy, not what you think will impress others." "Easy for you to say. You've always known who you are, what you want." I shook my head. That's not true. I've spent just as much time comparing myself to you, feeling like I was falling short. We've both been trapped in these roles we created. You as the high-achieving golden child, me as the reliable homebody. Neither one is the whole truth. Elaine took a sip of her coffee, considering this. So what do we do now? How do we move forward from here? It was the question I'd been asking myself since last night. How did we rebuild a relationship fractured by years of misunderstanding and culminating in a profound betrayal? I think, I said slowly, we start by being honest with each other. No more assumptions about what the other person is thinking or feeling. No more competing for some imaginary prize. And what about what I did? With Grandma's will? That's going to take time, I admitted. I can't just forget it happened. But I'm willing to work on forgiveness, if you're willing to earn it. Elaine nodded, her eyes suddenly bright with unshed tears. I am. I want to make this right, Rebecca. Not just the money, but all of it. I've missed having a sister. The simple admission touched something deep inside me. Despite everything, I'd missed having a sister too. Remember when we used to spend weekends at Grandma's house? I asked. How we'd explore the attic and make up stories about all the old things we found. A small smile curved Elaine's lips. And she'd make us hot chocolate with those tiny marshmallows, no matter what season it was. And read to us from her favorite books, doing all the different voices. She was amazing, Elaine said softly. I wish I'd appreciated her more while she was still here, not just at the end. She knew you loved her, I assured her. In your own way. Elaine looked up at me, her expression vulnerable. Did she know you forgave me? For drifting apart? For competing? For all of it? I thought about Grandma's last coherent days, when she'd squeeze my hand and murmur fragments of family stories, determined to pass them on even as her strength was failing. How she'd asked about Elaine made me promise to look after my sister. Family is all that matters in the end, she'd said. Remember that, Rebecca? Yes, I said. She knew. And she wanted us to find our way back to each other. Elaine brushed away a tear. I'd like that too. It wasn't going to be easy. We had years of hurt to work through, trust to rebuild, new ways of relating to discover. But sitting there in our parents' kitchen, cradling mugs of cooling coffee, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel so soon. Hope. The next few months were a delicate dance of rebuilding. True to her word, Elaine transferred my share of Grandma's estate within the promised 30 days. Mr. Harrington oversaw the process, ensuring everything was handled properly this time. The final amount was less than it should have been. Elaine had spent some of the money already, but it was substantial enough to make a difference in my life. I used part of it to establish a special collection at the library in Grandma's name, focusing on local history and the kind of classic literature she had loved. It felt like the right way to honor her memory, to ensure that her passion for knowledge and storytelling lived on in our community. Elaine returned to Chicago after that weekend, but something had changed between us. We started texting regularly, awkwardly at first, then with increasing openness. She sent me updates about her job, her apartment, the stray cat she'd started feeding on her fire escape. I shared news about the library, about the preservation project, about the small moments that made up my daily life. It wasn't the close relationship we'd had as children, not yet, but it was a beginning. 2 months after our confrontation, she called me with unexpected news. I quit my job, she said without preamble. Gave my notice yesterday. I nearly dropped my phone. You what? I thought making partner was everything to you. So did I. There was a lightness in her voice I hadn't heard in years. But ever since that weekend at Mom and Dad's, I haven't been able to stop thinking about what you said. About figuring out what actually makes me happy. not what impresses other people. And the answer isn't corporate law? She laughed. Apparently not. I've been miserable, Rebecca. Competing constantly, working myself to exhaustion, all to climb a ladder I'm not even sure I want to reach the top of. So what will you do now? That's actually why I'm calling. She hesitated. Remember how I said I was drowning in debt? Student loans mostly, but also credit cards from trying to keep up appearances? Yes. Well, I've been working with a financial advisor to create a payment plan. It's going to take time, but I'm committed to getting out from under it all. I've already sold my car and given up my ridiculously expensive apartment. That's great, Elaine, really. But what about work? How will you pay the bills? Another pause. I was wondering if I could come stay with you, just for a little while, until I figure things out. I was momentarily speechless. Elaine wanted to come stay with me? In my modest 2-bedroom apartment in our hometown? The sister who had once mockingly called my life quaint and provincial? You don't have to answer right away, she rushed on, misinterpreting my silence. I know it's a lot to ask, especially after everything, and I'd contribute, of course. I've already lined up some freelance legal work I can do remotely. Not enough to afford Chicago prices, but I could pay you rent, help with utilities. It's not that, I said. I'm just surprised. Are you sure this is what you want? Moving back here? No, she admitted. I'm not sure about anything right now except that I need a fresh start. And I'd like to be closer to family, to you, and Mom and Dad. Family. The word carried so much weight now. Obligation and comfort, history and possibility. Okay, I heard myself say. You can stay with me while you figure things out. Really? The relief in her voice was palpable. Rebecca, thank you. I promise I won't outstay my welcome. We'll work out the details, I said. When are you thinking of coming? End of the month? That's when my lease is up, and I should be finished wrapping things up at the firm by then. End of the month, I repeated. Okay. That gives me time to clear out the spare room. I'd been using it as a combination home office and storage space, but it could be converted back to a proper bedroom with some effort. I don't need much space, Elaine assured me. I'm downsizing, in more ways than one. After we hung up, I sat for a long time, trying to process this unexpected turn of events. Elaine, coming home. Elaine, giving up her prestigious career. Elaine, asking me for help. It was so contrary to everything I thought I knew about my sister that it was almost impossible to believe. And yet, I did believe her. The vulnerability in her voice, the absence of the defensive pride that had characterized our interactions for so long. It felt genuine. She was really doing this. I called Mom and Dad to tell them the news, expecting surprise, but they were oddly unsurprised. She's been talking about making a change for weeks, Mom said. Ever since that dinner. I wasn't sure she'd actually go through with it, but I hoped she would. You did? She wasn't happy, Rebecca. Your father and I could see that even before all this came out about Grandma's will. She was chasing something that kept moving further away. And you think moving back here, staying with me, is the answer? I think being closer to people who love her unconditionally might help her figure out what is. Unconditional love. Was that what I felt for my sister, even after what she'd done? I wasn't sure, but I was willing to find out. The end of the month arrived faster than I expected. Suddenly, it was the day of Elaine's arrival, and I was rushing around my apartment, making last-minute adjustments to the newly cleared spare room. I'd put fresh sheets on the bed, cleared space in the closet, even bought a small vase of flowers for the bedside table. I wanted her to feel welcome, despite the strangeness of our new arrangement. When the doorbell rang, I took a deep breath before answering it. Elaine stood on my doorstep, looking both familiar and different. Her hair was longer than when I'd last seen her, pulled back in a casual ponytail. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, a far cry from the power suits and designer dresses I associated with her. Behind her was a modest stack of luggage, far less than I'd expected. "Hi," she said, with an uncertain smile. "Hi," I replied, stepping back to let her in. "Welcome home." She wheeled her suitcase into the living room and looked around, taking in my cozy, book-filled space. "This is nice," she said, and I could tell she meant it. "It's small, but it works for me." I gestured toward the hallway. "Your room's the second door on the left. Bathroom's across the hall." "Perfect. Thank you again for doing this, Rebecca. I know it's not ideal." "It's fine, really." I hesitated, then added, "I'm glad you're here." Her eyes widened slightly in surprise, then softened. "Me too." The first few days were awkward as we navigated sharing a space after years of independence. Elaine was an early riser. I preferred to stay up late. She was meticulous about cleaning. I tended to let dishes sit in the sink until the end of the day. But we adjusted, finding a rhythm that accommodated both our habits. To my surprise, Elaine threw herself into local life with unexpected enthusiasm. She volunteered at the community garden, joined a yoga class at the rec center, even attended a book club meeting at the library. It was as if she were rediscovering simple pleasures long forgotten in her pursuit of professional success. "I forgot what it was like," she told me one evening as we sat on my small balcony watching the sunset, "to have time, to breathe." "Chicago doesn't have oxygen?" I teased gently. She smiled. "You know what I mean. Everything there was rush, rush, rush. Constant pressure to achieve, to advance, to impress. I never stopped to ask myself if I was actually enjoying any of it." "And were you enjoying it?" Elaine considered the question. "Parts of it. I loved the intellectual challenge of the work, the feeling of solving complex problems." She sipped her wine. "But the culture of it, the politics, the constant competition, that was exhausting, soul-crushing, really." "So what now? You can't volunteer at the community garden forever." "No," she agreed. "But I'm starting to get some ideas. There's a real need for affordable legal services in this area. Small businesses, nonprofits, families who can't afford big firm rates but still need quality representation." I raised an eyebrow. "Are you thinking of starting your own practice?" "Maybe. Eventually." She looked thoughtful. "There's also a position opening up at the community college, teaching business law part-time. I've got an interview next week." "Teaching? You?" "I know. It surprised me too. But when I saw the listing, something just clicked. I could see it, actually. Beneath Elaine's competitive drive had always been a sharp intelligence and a gift for clear explanation. She'd helped me through many a difficult homework assignment when we were younger, breaking down complex concepts into understandable pieces. "I think you'd be good at it," I said honestly. She looked pleased. "Thanks. It would be a huge pay cut from corporate law, but combined with some consulting work, it might be enough. And I'd have time to figure out what I really want long-term." "Time and space to breathe," I said, echoing her earlier words. "Exactly." She was quiet for a moment, watching the sky shift from orange to deep purple. "Rebecca? Do you think Grandma would be proud of me? For walking away from the prestige, the money, for starting over?" I thought about our grandmother, who had lived through the Great Depression, who had valued honesty and integrity above all things, who had told us stories about our ancestors who had faced hardships and emerged stronger. "Yes," I said with certainty. "She would be incredibly proud." Elaine's eyes glistened in the fading light. "I hope so. I'm trying to make it right, you know. All of it." I reached across the small table between our chairs and squeezed her hand. "I know you are. And in that moment, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky, I realized something important. I was proud of her too, for having the courage to admit her mistakes, for being willing to rebuild not just our relationship, but her entire life, for choosing authenticity over appearance. We still had a long way to go. Trust, once broken, doesn't mend overnight. But sitting there with my sister, I felt something I hadn't expected to feel again. The simple pleasure of shared silence, of companionship without pretense. To new beginnings, I said, raising my glass. Elaine smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes and clinked her glass against mine. To family. Family. Not perfect, not without flaws, but ours, and worth fighting for.